Hey, what's good everyone? I hope you're all doing well. Before we get started, I wanted to thank everyone who watches my stuff and takes the time to watch my stuff. I promise you guys I'll try to keep improving in each and every single post I do from here on forward, so it's only up from here. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you guys. So today I wanted to give you guys my own review on the beautiful Canon A-1 35mm film camera. At first glance, this camera could seem extremely intimidating, especially with all the features this thing comes with. However, trust me on this, the more you use this camera, the more you begin to realize how easy it is to use and how ergonomically friendly this camera system is. So I do have a few friends that own the Canon A-1, and each and every single one of them have told me that this camera was one of the best cameras that they've ever owned. So I ended up purchasing my own. I was looking around the internet and I was able to find a copy for about 95 bucks with a 50mm 1.4 lens. That's actually a great deal, and it also came with an action grip which helps with the ergonomics of this camera. This camera was around for quite some time. It was manufactured between 1978 through 1985, so that's a long 7 years. And what was amazing that Canon did that no other manufacturer did was that they implemented the first ever electronically controlled programmed auto exposure mode. I know that's a mouthful, or you could just say program mode for short. And what that feature did was allow the camera to automatically select the aperture and shutter speed settings to create a perfectly exposed image without having the user worry about it and just concentrate fully on their composition. And what was great about that feature was it practically turned the camera body into a point and shoot system, and no other camera system had that feature. So Canon pretty much set the benchmark for that. And with the amount of features that this camera had, Canon had essentially marketed this system out to the semi-professional user. So this system is a perfect equilibrium for someone who's just getting started in photography and someone who has a lot of experience. And since this camera was so popular, you can easily find this camera for about 70 to 200 bucks depending on its condition and if it comes with a lens or not, obviously. But I wouldn't go over like 150, 170 on this camera system just because of how readily available this is everywhere. So again, the reason why I like this camera so much is because of how ergonomically friendly that this camera is. It does seem a little cluttered at first, but that's okay. Like I said, the more you use this camera, the more you'll realize how easy it is to use. So with that being said, let's go over the camera features. Okay, so if we begin at the top, you have a switch that controls the on and off and the self timer features. A is for active or on, and L is for lock or off. And then with that same switch, if you pull it all the way down to the 2 and 10, those are your self timer, and those are in 2 and 10 second intervals. And I like that a lot because it basically consolidated 2 settings into one, so that's less moving parts that you have to worry about. So now we have this big gigantic lever right here, and this is your film advance lever. It feels very sturdy, and I like the way it feels when you advance the film. It sounds nice too. Then, if we look underneath the film advance lever, you have that little switch, which is the double exposure switch. And all you need to do is just push that button in, and you'll be able to take a double exposure, or you can take multiple exposures on using the switch depending on what you're trying to achieve. Now, if you look here on the left side of the camera, you have your ASA or ISO dial. There's a silver button right here on the left side of the dial that you need to press down in order to adjust the settings. As with on the right side of that dial, you'll see the exposure compensation dial, and there's a button on the bottom right of it that you would need to press in order to adjust that setting as well. And then on the top of this dial, you have your film rewind button. You just need to pull this thing up and you're ready to go. And then over here you have your viewfinder, which is large and bright, and it's very easy to see through. And on the bottom of the viewfinder, you'll see that there's a bright digital LCD readout that displays your camera's exposure settings, which is pretty neat. If you look to the left of the viewfinder, you'll see a little switch, and that activates the viewfinder blind. And that feature is neat for if you're doing like a long exposure of a landscape somewhere and you don't need any of that extra light to go seep in through the viewfinder window. It shuts it for you, and that's a very great feature to have. Now, when you look at the top of this, you'll have your battery check button, And then that's surrounded by the battery check button is the viewfinder display lever. And this is basically an on and off switch for the digital LCD readout that's in the bottom of the viewfinder. And again, the idea for that feature is to use in conjunction with shooting in program mode, so the user's focusing more on their composition without having to worry about their camera settings, which is actually pretty neat, less distractions. Unfortunately, this camera isn't fully mechanical. It does require a battery for it to operate. You could use either one 4LR44 or one PX28 battery, and those batteries can actually be found quite easily. Just go to your local battery shop or camera shop, or go around the internet like on Amazon or eBay, and you'll easily find it on there. This camera does use the Canon FD lens mount, and it is also backwards compatible with the Canon FL mount as well. And what's great about that is that Canon created some of the most beautiful and sharp glass, and the images that I've captured with this are absolutely sharp and stunning. I currently have the 28mm f2.8 and the 50mm 1.4 lenses to pair up with this camera body. Okay, so now let's talk about the camera modes. Canon does state that this camera offers 5 modes, and they are aperture priority, shutter priority or time value, program mode, stop down mode, and full manual mode. Okay, so for aperture priority, this is one of my favorite modes to shoot in. This allows a user to have full control over the aperture setting while the camera selects the appropriate shutter speed depending on your aperture setting. To set it, the first thing you want to do is set your lens aperture ring dial to A right here. Then at the top of the camera you'll find an auto exposure selector or AE selector, and you'll want to switch that over to AV or aperture value. And then to select an aperture setting, you're going to want to use the AT dial right here, and now your camera is in aperture priority. For shutter priority, this allows the user to have full control over the shutter speed while the camera automatically selects the appropriate aperture depending on your shutter speed setting. So that's the opposite of what aperture priority does. To set this mode, again, you want to set the aperture ring dial to A. Next, you want to have the AE selector switched over to TV or time value, and then you also use the AT dial right here to select your shutter speed. Now for program mode, you want to set the lens aperture ring dial to A. Then you switch the AE selector to TV, and then on the AT dial you want to change the setting all the way up to where it says P, and you'll see that little green P right here. And then that essentially turns your camera into a point and shoot, and you're ready to go. So just a quick tip, when you're shooting on program mode, be sure to switch off the viewfinder display lever. That way you're concentrating and focusing more on your composition rather than worrying about the camera settings in your viewfinder. And then last but not least, you have your stop down auto exposure mode. To be honest with you guys, I'm not too familiar with that mode, and I've never shot with it or using that mode, so I'll put a link to the owner's manual down in the description so you guys can look that up if you guys choose to. So overall, there you have it. That's the Canon A-1. I highly enjoy this workhorse of a camera as it consolidates so many features into one single system. I would highly recommend purchasing one if you don't have one already, or at least give it a try if one of your buddies have one. And to be honest with you guys, this camera replaced my Minolta X700 as my daily, and no, not because my X700 broke. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. It's also a quick tip and user guide. Feel free to leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much.